Hello and welcome to this bite-sized edition of our Lunch and Learn series. Today we're going to recap February's Lunch and Learn event, which looked closely at how you can use TED data to help decision making in your organisation. This session's key learning points covers, first of all, how to access the TED data through the TED platform, but also how to use it to support your OD objectives and to help your decision making around where you target your support and how you use it to enhance the work of teams across your organisation. We're looking at how you can use data at different levels in your organisation and how you can present data in different ways to be meaningful to different stakeholders. I'll touch on how you can interpret different elements of the data within TED and also how to navigate the data once you've exported it from the TED database. So the first question we asked at our Lunch and Learn event was, why is data important? We explored what it meant to different stakeholders, and it's important to recognise how data can mean different things to different people, and it can serve different purposes depending on the way it's been presented. When we think of data, senior leaders might be asking, how can I use data to make a difference for our organisation? So in that context, we're looking at that big data, what it means on that broad focus right across your organisation. Whereas a team leader or a divisional leader might be more interested in how the data can help them make decisions which are specific to their department. They may be thinking around where they can target their support, where there might be pockets of good practice which can be shared, or where there may be areas that need to be addressed and where support should be offered. The team leader is more likely to be thinking about the practical implications of what that data means for them and their team. They'll be looking for next steps, and through TED, we hope that the data provided in TED reports helps team leaders to make those decisions alongside their team. In our organisations, it's likely that different stakeholders can use this data within TED for different purposes. TED collects a wealth of data when you have numerous teams using it at different points throughout the year in your organisation. The real benefits of TED are that it provides you real-time feedback on the work that's going on across your teams in the organisation, but also as more and more teams begin to use it, it can be really valuable in helping that decision process. We see here that senior leaders might be looking specifically at strategic data. Division or departmental leaders might be looking at that departmental level data, and they maybe have divisional access accounts. And a team leader might be looking more specifically at their own TED reports or follow-up reports to make those team-based decisions. As OD and HR practitioners, it's likely that we're looking at all these different levels of data, and we need to be able to zoom in and zoom out of the data within our TED platform to be able to support different areas of our organisation, both at a team level, departmental level, and at an organisation level. At a team level, it's likely that team leaders will only engage when they understand how their data can have a practical impact on the work that they do. Team leaders might want to use TED data as a measure for the team's engagement so that they can clearly indicate what they want to celebrate with the team or the areas they'd like to work on. Maybe they want to understand the next steps towards an improvement, and that's where TED toolkits provide those practical examples of how teams can deal with engagement data. Team leaders might also want to measure improvements over time so that they have tangible evidence of the work that they have done and the impact that it has had. I feel the key factor for many team leaders is understanding how the engagement measure can be an indicator of operational success. So it can be useful for them to combine TED data with other useful workforce metrics. Signposting to research on relationships with patient care, team well-being and productivity can often be a useful approach to help team leaders understand that tangible link between engagement and practical operational outcomes. Sometimes the best evidence can come from examples of other teams who've used the approach successfully. And that's why with TED, we always encourage you to think of what those case studies examples might be and how you can share the great practice that some teams are doing to inspire others and show them how it can work in practice. For divisional leaders, it's likely that they want to use the data in a slightly different way. While still interested in team level data, departmental leaders are often more concerned with the broader picture across their service. A divisional lead might be looking at TED data to understand the amount of engagement activity that's happening in terms of your numbers of TEDs that are taking place. They might also want to use that data to give recognition to teams who are performing particularly well or making the most improvements. It can be useful to identify common themes which are cropping up across multiple teams so that you can focus support and maybe wider engagement activities at a divisional level. It's also useful for divisional leaders to be able to compare with other workforce metrics. At this level, it's likely that departmental or division leaders would have data such as sickness absence, freedom to speak up requests, staff survey indicators, and more that can provide further insight when paired with TED data. At a strategic level, it's likely leaders are looking for an organisation-wide indicator of engagement. TED data helps provide that measure for organisational engagement, and whilst it's not intended to be a replacement for the NHS staff survey, it can help to get a year-round picture of the direction that you're heading in and what work teams are doing to build on that staff survey feedback you get once a year. Organisation level data can help you identify themes early so you can address them before the next national survey. And it can also help you measure the areas of focus from previous staff surveys year round. TED data helps senior leaders understand the organisation's culture and demonstrate the engagement activities that are going on to influence that culture positively. And perhaps most importantly, from our perspective, these are the stakeholders who will be looking for that return on investment. When you invest in TED, your senior leaders will be looking at how is that spend on TED being useful for our organisation, what are the tangible outcomes, and where are we seeing that return? They might be asking questions like, is TED worth the time and the money that we put in? Are we seeing broader impacts of our localised work? And with TED data at this organisation level, having got multiple teams to use TED, commit to follow-ups, you begin to paint that picture of that organisational impact that you're having through TED work across your trust. So when we consider those different levels of data, it's clear, especially at higher levels, that we need a greater pool of data to draw from. This is why when we're considering how to assess the success of TED, we measure it at different levels, and we need to consider the amount of time we've had with active teams using the system. For some of our clients, you might be in the early stages of your journey with TED, but as more teams use TED over time, the more valuable the data within TED becomes to inform your work. In the short term, the most immediate type of feedback you can get is through qualitative measures. Speak to the team leaders, speak to the team members that are using TED, and listen and watch for that journey that they go on throughout their first and second TED cycles. In the qualitative feedback from listening to the stories of your team leaders and team members, and even yourselves as TED practitioners, you can begin to understand the early experiences you get from using the TED platform and applying the TED approach. The first piece of data you get comes through your early TED reports from the initial teams who've done their surveys. Those initial reports give you a quick snapshot of where teams are at and what their starting point is. Over time, you'll begin to get teams who repeat TED for a second, third, and subsequent times. These follow-up reports are invaluable because they are the ones that show you how far your teams have come since they had that baseline TED measure when they first interacted with the approach. You can track their progress over time, and it's here when team leaders begin to understand the impact that it's having, and they can see those tangible benefits that it's having on team culture. In the medium term, we start to get metrics at higher levels so that divisional leaders can start to tap into results which show themes across multiple different areas of their departments. We can also start to get organisation level data, particularly in terms of uptake numbers, where we can see which areas of the organisation are engaging with TED, which ones might be disengaged by it, and where we can target our communications and support to help promote uptake in the future. And finally, in the long term, it can take a while for this data to come through, but this is when your TED data becomes even more valuable towards firstly us as TED practitioners, but also to our senior leaders who can start to look at comparisons with other measures, such as the annual staff survey, and you can make year-on-year indicators of which direction your organisation is heading, how many teams are improving, and who's engaging with the TED process. It's at this point where it becomes easier to understand that return on investment for your activity across the trust. You can begin to track where there are pockets of TED activity and what benefits those pockets are having. You might look back at the historical staff survey data, or you might look at other measures such as sickness absence, retention, or other things specific to that department's workflow. So next, I'm going to share some of the information that we have within TED so that you can see how to download and access the reports in their current format. So here I am logged into the TED website. I'm logged in as a trust admin, so I get the additional features of having the reporting section on my left-hand menu bar. In this section, at a glance, I can see the numbers of teams that have been accessing TED and completing surveys. Over time, I can begin to see year-on-year comparisons, and this is a screen which we're looking to enhance in 2024, giving you more ways to look at this data so that you can see increases quarterly, you can see activity in different areas, and you can see real-time evidence of the TED work that's happening in your trust. At the moment, the best ways of accessing your data are through our two export reports. You have a trust data export, which will show you at a divisional level breakdown what those high level results are. And you also get an export surveys data option. This provides you with a spreadsheet which shows you all of the data within your TED system. Here, I'm on that surveys data export. And from this screen, you can see all of the teams who've been engaging with TED, along with all of their data that's contained within the system. It contains things such as the date surveys were created, the numbers of people interacting with the survey, and the scores of individual teams. It's important when we look at this data that we are mindful of the psychological safety which we want to provide our teams through TED. It's not intended that this data is shared widely across your organisation, even with senior leads in some circumstances. What we want to do is ensure that anybody accessing this data is using it for reasons to be able to understand the support that teams need and be able to target our support and communications around TED. When you're looking at this data, the way I often look to cut it is by removing data that's unwanted from the system. Because this spreadsheet provides everything that's in my TED system, there's often data which isn't useful for me as an OD practitioner. To do this, the first point which I will engage with is to highlight the second row and filter that column. I can do this by coming to the sort and filter option and clicking filter. You'll notice this gives me drop down arrows on each column within my data set. When I look at this, I can begin to filter my data. So for instance, in terms of created on, I can put this in a descending order so that my most recent surveys sit at the top of my list. One of the other first steps which I'll do when I look at TED data is to filter out any surveys which haven't had enough engagement to really be classed as TED activity happening. And this would be any surveys with less than 3 people invited. So under the number of people invited, I can deselect 0, 1, and 2. And then know that any data on the spreadsheet now has at least been sent to 3 people. I'll also do the same for participation numbers, because surveys which haven't yet had any engagement can't really be classed as a real TED because there's not been that opportunity to review a survey and have that team-based conversation. So again, I'll click the drop-down box on participation numbers, deselect 0, 1, and 2. And this again gives me a more meaningful data set for right across my organisation. So what I've got now here is a full list of the TEDs which have the potential to have been discussed and worked on by their teams. Looking at this now, I can begin to cut it in ways that I want to suit the different stakeholders that I'm presenting to. Something I do monthly at Lancashire Teaching Hospitals is provide data updates to our different divisions across the trust. And things they might be interested in might be the numbers of TED's activity month on month, or in the averages across the different TED themes, so they know which areas are high performing and which areas they may want to work on as a division. So I'll show you how to do this now. Firstly, I need to select a division to look at. So under the division column, I can click the drop down box, and if I deselect all of them and just click one for us to look at. So here I've filtered just the surveys for the surgery division in our organisation. From this, I can begin to look at month-on-month data. So I can look at things like in here, they had 2 surveys in February 24. Looks as though they had 7 surveys in January 24 and 3 in December. So that begins to give me a picture of the types of TED activity. And if I go back further historically, I can look at trends. Are there particular months which are more active than others? Are there times of year where maybe teams aren't engaging with TED? And begin to look for what sits behind that data as to the reasons. Sometimes that might be something I'm comfortable with, or other times it might be a cause for me to think, where can we add additional support or improve our comms to encourage uptake at different times of the year. Other things I might want to do, if I scroll along, maybe I want to filter by a directorate or SBU. So let's just choose one of our SBUs in theatres here. So we can see we get a smaller sample set of our data, and this is where we can begin to look at what are those themes telling us for the theatres SBU. As I scroll along, I can look at things like average TED score, and if I highlight the data in this column, Excel gives me an average at the bottom there. So I can see that the average there is 3.6 across the TED scores for this division. I might also want to look at individual engagement, where we get 3.7. Team engagement, we're getting 3.4. And the overall TED score is around 3.6. So again, this can be a meaningful indicator of where is that department at this point in time. And then I may want to look at the differences between 2024, when we get more data, and 2023's data. So again, I can filter that out, compare it year on year, and see if the work that this department has been doing has made a difference, or if maybe they need to change their track in some way. I can also do a similar analysis with the themes within TED. So we can see here for team communication over this time, the average is 3.5. If we look at something like review and celebrate success, that's 3.2. So this might be an area this area wants to work on. And similarly, I can also do this with the different questions that sit within TED. So if I want to go down to a more granular data and say, perhaps this question about we value and respect each other, look at that, and that's a 3.3. So we might decide, or the division might decide, they want to do more work and more comms around their approach to valuing and respecting individuals across their department. Other ways that you can filter this are by your archived surveys. So if you want to filter out any that have been archived, so maybe there's been repeat surveys since that point in time, you can untick the yes. So we've just got surveys there that have not been archived, or we may want to look at just follow-ups and see what's the difference between our follow-up data, where we've got a 3.8 average, and maybe our non-follow-up data, where for this one, we've got a 4.0. So we can see that in this area, teams may have declined since they did their first TEDs. So this might be an area that this particular department wants to work on. So this is just an example of how you might want to look at this. When you present it, you might want to pull out things like this, so putting in the average scores against the different questions to be able to present it, or maybe look at the TED themes over time as well. You also might want to look at uptake numbers and present it in a way similar to this. So this is something which I do monthly at Lancs Teaching Hospitals, and now I'm going to show you some of the ways that I present this so that it's engaging and meaningful for those different stakeholders. So having accessed our data and being able to cut it in different ways to suit our needs, we need to think again around who are our audience, who are we presenting this data to, and what will be meaningful for them. So as a recap, remember, for team leaders, we might be aiming to encourage action, to encourage team leaders who've maybe not already engaged with TED to have a go, maybe to spark some engagement activities, maybe a repeat TED. We might be encouraging them to celebrate their strengths or recognise opportunities to improve. Good ways of doing this are to signpost them to real examples that they can relate to. We're always encouraging our clients and ourselves at Lancashire Teaching Hospitals to build case studies of different places where TED has been used to harness team engagement and to promote success across our trust. You can see on screen here some examples of the different types of case studies, and within these we'll use elements of TED data to support the stories about the journeys that teams have been through with TED. By using data as part of a more qualitative storytelling approach, it can be a great way to engage others to use the system and for others to be able to relate to the work that's gone on with TED. It also helps new teams and new team leaders recognise how a simple data set can be used to inspire meaningful work that has tangible actions and tangible outputs for the way that they work. This slide shows some further examples of how different teams have used this to either share their great work on social media or to present those tangible metrics and back it up with the elements of the story, such as quotes from team leaders or team members around how it's made them feel, how it's made them work better, and how it's brought them together and improved that team culture together. So data can be a useful way of evidencing the stories and showing those tangible benefits that teams experience. At our next level, we think about division or departmental leaders. So a reminder that we want to encourage ownership of that data from our divisional leads, but we also want them to be advocates for the process. So helping divisional leads understand those metrics within TED, understand what are the high performing areas, what are the areas they may want to focus on across their division, can really influence that work that they do, helping them recognise departmental themes. Here's an example of something that I've done in the past. So here we can see for the surgery division how year on year they've increased their TED work, and in fact in the previous year at this point they'd had significant success with TED. So this is a good way of letting divisional leaders know that the work they're doing around engagement and with TED is having an impact. What I also do monthly with our divisional updates is give a shout out to the teams who are engaging with TED. We don't want to expose any team's results, but we do want to highlight that they are engaging with TED and beginning their journey or using it in a way to help their team. So on the screen, we can see our little circle with teams using TED this month to give a shout out to that good practice that's happening, which might also inspire other teams to have a go as well. This is also a useful opportunity to advertise upcoming support sessions, such as team leader training or a TED community event that you might have. Another example of how to present your data is on this slide. So here I've highlighted where TED fits in with our big plan, which at Lancashire Teaching Hospitals is our strategic plan for the organisation. TED is embedded into that big plan, and it's part of the building team spirit, trust value that we have. In there, for our DCS division, I've indicated the numbers of surveys that have happened in the current year, how many TEDs they've done since a particular cut-off date, so over the last month maybe, or quarter, and also where they're tracking against the previous year, so that they know if they're ahead or if they're behind and what work needs to be done. Again, we give a shout out to the teams that are using TED for that recognition and signpost to useful events which might help others. My final example, this is for a corporate division. We've looked at having set targets in terms of the numbers of teams that engage with TED. So whilst we want to encourage teams to do TED, we don't want to ever be too prescriptive in terms of insisting that teams have to do TED. So using target measures like this can be a way which motivates some teams to start to engage with it and help their divisions progress. Here we can see that for this division, they had 77 team leaders trained. So that's another useful metric which you might get from your own training records, but also the progress so far against their big plan objective. So at this point in time, this division had completed 13 and they had 17 to go to meet their target for our strategic plan. The final stakeholder to consider is our organisational leaders. So for organisational leaders, to recap what we said earlier, we want to demonstrate the engagement activity that's going on, highlight that return on investment, and identify opportunities for organisational level work or support that we can do across the trust. We also want to be able to triangulate team intelligence and feedback that we're getting through TED. So one way that we present this is in this format. So here we can see against our divisional targets, we can see our year-on-year uptake as an organisation, and in the current reporting year, what our progress is so far against that target. We can see how many we had this time last year. So at the point when I did this slide, we were aiming for 64 and we were currently on 70. So we were slightly ahead of target, but of course we had a more ambitious overall target to aim for the year. Again, we signpost the work that's going on so that senior leaders can signpost others to TED work and how they can get involved. But what we've also done here is highlight which are the strongest performing themes for the trust. So in this case, it was team purpose, and the weakest theme at that time was review and celebrate success. So possibly an opportunity to promote some of our recognition schemes, to look at what's relevant to teams and what team feedback is saying to us. So in summary, this session has highlighted how you can consider different audiences and use TED data in different ways to meet those audience needs. I've demonstrated how you can access your TED data through a Trust Admin login and how you can navigate the spreadsheets which show you all of the data within your TED system. But we've also covered how you can focus on the data to influence short, medium, and long-term growth, and how over time, the more TED activity that goes on, the more useful that data becomes to you and how you can use it with other measures to help your engagement work.